If you ran a tavern in ancient Babylon and set the wrong price for beer, the law prescribed a single punishment: drowning. Taram knew this the way she knew everything else about her trade, by instinct, by repetition, and by the kind of careful attention that had kept her alive this long. This morning that attention arrived sharper than she had earned it. Before the sun reached the rooftops of Babylon, she was already working. The tavern was a single low room near the market district, its walls pressed close with fermenting vessels and stacked loaves of bar beer. The smell was particular grain on the edge of sourness, something almost sweet, damp clay, old smoke. Bar beer was a twice-baked barley bread, made without rising, made to keep for months without spoiling. Crumbled into water, mixed with dates and other grain, left to ferment in the room's warmth, it became something else entirely. Mesopotamian beer was not the clear poured thing it would later become. It was thick with grain sediment, dense and nutritious. Laborers drank it through long reed straws fitted with small filters at the tip, which strained the solids. The hymn to Ninkasi, a Sumerian poem from around 1800 BCE, was a song of praise to the goddess of brewing and also a working recipe. Beer was offered to the gods, prescribed as medicine, paid as wages across every city in the river plains. Taram kept 3 grades. Ordinary beer for the morning rush. A stronger batch for those who could pay for it. A premium grade for the rare customer who arrived with enough silver or grain to make it worth the pouring. Each grade had a set price. The price was not set by her. It was set by law, carved onto a standing stone in the heart of the city, and not open to interpretation. The Code of Hammurabi, inscribed under King Hammurabi in the 18th century before the Common Era, covered everything from property to debt. Tavern-keepers occupied several entries of their own. None of them were encouraging. Law 108 was the one she thought about most often. If she demanded silver when a customer offered grain, and the exchange rate favored her rather than the customer, the penalty was death. Specifically, she would be thrown into the water. Not a particularly comfortable law to run a business under. But Taram had been running this one for 11 years, and the law's bark and its bite were, on most ordinary days, separated by a considerable distance, provided the measures were right. There was another law she was thinking about rather less willingly that morning as she set the vessels and trimmed the first lamp. The city outside was still quiet. She swept the floor, checked the weight of the day's grain stock, and waited for the light. By the time the sun cleared the rooftops, the first customers were at the door. The earliest arrivals of any morning in Babylon were the laborers. Temple workers, irrigation crews, men who spent their days hauling and digging and shifting stone in the river heat. Their morning beer was not a reward. It was part of their wage. Since at least the 3rd millennium before the Common Era, Babylonian employers had been paying workers partly in beer alongside their other rations. A clay tablet held in the British Museum records a workers' daily beer allocation as a line item of income, scratched alongside their grain rations. By Taram's time, the practice was centuries old and entirely ordinary. She filled each vessel according to rank and grade, checked the measures against the calibration marks, and let the morning do what it always did. A group of workers settled around a shared vessel and passed the reed straw between them. The conversation was about the canal works to the south. The drinking was steady, not hurried. Later, a scribe arrived and paid in silver. Taram weighed the piece he offered against her standard and handed over a cup of the ordinary grade. The exchange required no words and was over before the next customer had crossed the threshold. After him, a dockworker paid in grain, tipping a measured portion onto the counter from a cloth bag. Taram checked it against her weights without comment. It was correct. It almost always was. The morning went on this way. Measures poured, grain and silver weighed, vessels rinsed and refilled. Reed straws brought to tables and returned for washing. A hand extended on the counter without a word. She had the cup ready. The room was warm with fermentation and bodies, and Taram moved through it the way she always had, measuring everything. Just before midday, a servant appeared at the threshold and would not come any further. He held out a small clay tablet, 2 portions of the premium grade to be carried out. His mistress, he explained, was waiting around the corner. His mistress was a naditu, a woman of considerable status, attached to a temple household with the legal right to own property and manage her own affairs. She was also forbidden under Law 110 of the Code of Hammurabi from entering a tavern or opening one of her own, on pain of death by burning. Taram filled 2 cups, handed them to the servant, and took the silver. She did not remark on the situation. It was not the first time. The rules that kept women of high standing out of taverns were not the rules that kept them from wanting what taverns sold. The city accommodated its contradictions without comment. The naditu could own land across the city and negotiate contracts that would outlast her lifetime, but she could not stand in a room that Taram owned and ask for a drink herself. The midday rush faded, and the room changed. The laborers had gone back to their work sites. The scribe would not return until evening. The long stretch of afternoon lay ahead, the kind of time Babylon spent in the shade of its own walls. 2 men arrived sometime after the midday prayer and took a corner table. The room settled around them differently than it settled around most. Taram recognized the cut of their garments, if not their faces. Soldiers, or had been recently. The kind of men who sat with their backs against the wall and their eyes on the door. She brought them the ordinary grade without being asked. They paid in grain, which she measured without looking at them. The transaction required nothing more. They drank steadily and spoke in low voices, and after a while Taram stopped noticing them. They settled into the room's afternoon quiet. Heart of the hum. She was rinsing the serving vessel at the back of the room when the first fragment reached her. A name she recognized. Not a common name. She kept rinsing. She did not turn around. She moved with the same unhurried ease she brought to every other task in the room. 11 years had taught her that much. Another fragment. Something about the river gate. A particular night. Law 109 of the Code of Hammurabi was plain on this point. If conspirators met in the house of a tavern-keeper and she did not report them to the palace, she would be put to death. The law did not define conspirators. The law did not specify how much a tavern-keeper was required to overhear before she was considered to know. She set the vessel down, moved to another table, picked up a cup that did not need wiping and wiped it anyway. One of the soldiers glanced up. Taram was already looking somewhere else. She set the cup down and walked back to the counter, unhurried, as though she had nothing to think about. The silence lasted 4 heartbeats. Then the low voices resumed. She did not know enough. That was what she told herself, and it was true as far as it went. She had heard a name, a river gate, and the beginning of something she had not heard the end of. She had no certainty. And without certainty, she had nothing to report. The soldiers finished their beer and left before the evening prayer. They did not look at her as they went. The room filled again for an hour as the working day ended, then emptied. When the last customer was gone, Taram bolted the door and spread the day's take across the counter. Grain in one pile, measured against the weights. Silver in another, each piece set to the balance. The counting was a ritual of 11 years, and she gave it the same careful attention she gave to every measure poured that day. The totals were reasonable. Not a great day. Not a bad one. Every measure she had poured was the correct measure. Every exchange had been set at the regulated rate. This was not virtue. It was the minimum required to remain open, and Taram had long since stopped distinguishing between the two. She thought about the soldiers. She had been thinking about them, in one corner of her mind, since midday. She did not know their names. She did not know the name they had mentioned, only that it was familiar in a way that made something tighten behind her ribs. The law required certainty. That was the argument she had been constructing for the past 5 hours. She was not certain. She would not report men on the basis of fragments. Women who kept taverns in Babylon occupied an unusual position. They ran their own businesses, negotiated their own contracts, held their own accounts. The law watched them closely for exactly this reason. The position cut both ways. Necessary to the daily economy of the city, and suspect for the same reason. Too independent to be entirely trusted. Too useful to be done without. She swept the counter, poured the dregs from the last vessels into the gutter outside, and listened to the sound the city made when it thought it was alone. The river was there somewhere beyond the walls, as it always was. The canal to the east. The market gate somewhere in the dark, bolted for the night. She did not report what she had heard. She had not heard enough. The lamp was trimmed. The door was bolted. The bar pier for tomorrow was already soaking. She had learned, over 11 years behind this counter, that certainty was a luxury that a wise in Babylon could not always afford. The door closed. The city went on,